All right, let's go 5. Let's go DD.
We're plateauing. All right.
I need some water.
The question for number 5, Evanoff asserts that social relations will certainly be normatively structured. We explain this and discuss the ethical implications for actors concerned with intercultural ethics. To cite the text directly on page 6, we noted that part of the answer is the question is not whether social relationships will be normatively structured, but rather how they will be structured, to what degree, for what ends, and who will determine what these structures will be. What we determine is that there will always be a dominant culture. It's challenging to define a norm interculturally. Within each culture, there will also be normative structures or cultural norms. And as we had talked about a little bit earlier with disruption, status quo disruption creates a new but equally oppressive status quo. Ethical implications, ethics are not universal. Some people and groups will always feel more or less oppressed than others in the same instance. Making sure that everyone gets a voice, not just the dominant group, collective voice. And the goal is to free from the status quo, which we've learned is really not possible. So the extension question is, why does Evanoff assume a normative tendency to social relations?
Feel free to just jump on in.
It's funny that pink slips and green cards are involved with this today.
Yeah.
So why does Evanoff assume a normative tendency to social relations? And we've just defined earlier what we felt normative to be.
Yeah, and I think he's saying that that's just kind of how real life happens. You know, there's a quote in there that, you know, that people involved determine the degree, ends, and who for the social interaction. So normative that's just how you do it. You don't have to think about it. It just happens.
So to put the quote behind it, you read half of it. The part B of while postmodernism adopts a seemingly radical stance to cause for disruption of the status quo, part B, it fails to adequately acknowledge the fact that the social interactions people have with each other will always be normatively structured.
Yes, right on. Right on. So the word normative, you know, sort of normative research is what we observe in usually human behavior. But in ethics, there are normative ethics. And does anybody know what that means? Another use of that word normative?
Consideration of beliefs, values, and forms of behavior.
Yes. Anything else? See if you come up with anything else.
You talked about normative and empirical earlier. So we're talking about that, that the observable or be able to see it within a society or structure or
Yes.
something.
Yes. And so when one sees what everybody else around him is doing, it kind of becomes normative, can also mean like the way it should be.
Yeah.
Kind of accepted, and it's based on those things that Catherine was just talking about, values, shared beliefs. But when we share it, then we say, well, yeah, it should be, because we share it. You know, this is the way it ought to be. So that word normative can also be, well, everybody ought to, should, because this is what I know. Kind of the standard, yes.
One of the things that stood out in the book was how it talks about when a child is born, they don't have that. And it just starts slowly, and then we are who we are. Because slowly you see, it doesn't always have to be didactic, it's just slowly you see what is acceptable and what's not. And it makes up who you are, and who society is becoming,
Yes.
all those things.
Right on. All right, anybody else want to jump on that one? We might be running out of, I have an aha moment, and that's good. We're running out of questions. All right, let's have the next one then.
That's Aaron.
Explain the literary allusion to Scylla and Charybdis as it relates to the text. Describe the polarization of the two characters and the moderation of the intervening constructive schema.
He's on help.
Alright.
No, that's not possible.
This is all your power went to your head.
Alright, so what we determined is that Scylla and Charybdis are literary allusions to the Western thinking of foundationalism. Let me come up here.
All right.
Alright. So what we discovered is that Scylla and Charybdis are the literary allusions to the Western thinking of foundationalism and the postmodern thought of relativism. Constructivism refers to navigating or choosing between two dangers, either on which brings harm. In short, Scylla and Charybdis were, in Greek mythology, sea monsters. And our analogy as it relates to foundationalism and relativism is we often have to choose the lesser of two evils, where we find ourselves stuck between a rock and a hard place. Foundationalism embraces the final absolute truth, ethics or persuasion, popular direction, all should move in, whereas relativism within a broader context, ethics of respect, more freedom for each culture to move independently of others. And for constructivism, it's the middle of the road, and one must have some sort of foundation, but it must be open to a broader context. And our question that we posed to you, or that the paper posed to all of us, what corollaries do you draw between Bennett's model of intercultural competence and Evanoff's description of constructivism?
Constructivism is taking the content of the past, present, and possible future, individual values, and all those involved values, then making a decision about what should be employed. The meta-ethics outlook is similar to Bennett's last stage of the intercultural competence model, which is integration. Constructivism builds a bridge between cultures, and one can flow in and out of one's own culture into another readily, which is integration, through the utilization of acquiring and in perspective and research. As in the Bennett's model, one moves from stage to stage in a linear fashion. The constructivist outlook of gathering context moves an individual from acceptance to integration. Integration is the act of taking on another culture, thus through constructive thought, an individual makes the choice under the particular circumstances to behave in a way productive to their environment.
So what she said is it's an ongoing
That's
process. It's an ongoing process.
Yes, yes.
And every step of the way is just important as what happens at the end. Right?
Absolutely. And you all feel free to share some of your responses. Stacy?
I had found that as a person becomes more interculturally competent, there's a major change in the quality of their experience, and you kind of have to go through each of Bennett's phases in order to understand both ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism in order to come to a constructivism.
That is a great thought. Yes.
One of the things that I really like that, and I'm something very sick about that. It's, constructivism also allows us to change our opinions to get to the next level. And that's kind of the whole model of Bennett's model is we evolve, change, it's okay. A lot of times when we in our opinions, I feel you're stuck, it's the normative, follow the standard, this is where it's going, whereas you don't really develop.
I have another thing that I wrote that I thought was cute that you all can understand because I have a toddler. It said here, modernism is no power and make no decisions.
So what kind of toddler do you have?
She's in the middle, she's going down the path.
She's neither Scylla nor Charybdis. She's maybe Odysseus.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was reading the story, I think somebody survived by holding on to the picture in the whirlpool.
Correct.
And I kind of interpret that as holding on to your own beliefs in the midst of others. So while you're in that, you still have to be able to, I don't like you're in the mix, but you can't lose who you are.
That's really
That's
profound.
right.
So explain a little bit more for maybe folks that didn't look up Scylla and Charybdis as much.
And this is loud, so.
Yeah, it's what
Yeah, you really, I can't find this in my notes, but I just put, the difference of the giant sea monster and then Charybdis is a giant whirlpool. And my note just says he enters a whirlpool and survives by holding on to the fig tree, and I thought it was important about going with those steps and everything, like you can still have your own beliefs, but at the end of the day, the culture that we are in is a big mix, and so while it's important to respect those and value them, I think it's also at the same time important to remain who you are and stay true to yourself. And so maybe that's the way to survive, is not so much forgetting who you are and everything, but I mean that's what makes us diverse, like that's how we function. So
I would like to add something, just personal experience as an immigrant, where you do come to a country like in awe and you have this perception, and in America you do have this Hollywood perception before you come, and then everything is so much cooler here. So that's one of the stages you go through, and you're like, so when you go back, you're like, oh, I'm not American, you know? But then when you go, at one point you accept, there's always gonna be this Swiss person that I am, and there's always gonna be so un-American things that I do, and that's okay, but you get it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoy this because I used to have mythology a lot, so that's the reason why I'm so into this, but let me tell you, y'all. Okay. Odysseus goes through the two, Scylla and Charybdis, and, he has to make a decision. Now, we don't know by reading the Odyssey if he talks to the crew and says, which way should we go? Should we do the greater good? Because he chose the greater good, which was to sacrifice only a few of the people by going towards the sea monster instead of going to the whirlpool, which would totally get rid of the whole ship.
Yeah. The sea monster had 6 heads and would eat the head of a
Right.
sailor for every head.
Right, so 6 of them died and not the whole ship, and he made it through because he only let 6 of them die. But I don't know if he did discuss with them, okay, you all, have this situation, we gotta go through here. Let's make a decision. Did he get their buy-in? I think that's what he's trying to do, Evanoff is trying to say in the article. Get everybody's buy-in, so if anyone dies, then everybody's buy-in was in it.
Yes. That is a great way to look at both of those pieces, to look at it that way, and to look at, in the end, the only way I survive is I hold on to what my roots are. Which just kind of goes back to that whole thing where I'm from, the where I'm from thing that you did. Like, the way that poem's constructed is, it gets at the core of stuff you hold on to. They're kind of end of days things. This is, you strip away, the shiny scarf or whatever, and I'm just a Georgia girl, that's me. So, both of those are things I never would have thought of. Different interpretations. So next time I teach this, I'm gonna wait for somebody else to say that and see if they're good enough to come up with it. That's really good. I love it. Okay, thank you, Erin. All right, we're on the last 2.
I know.
So we got AV here.
I noticed that first thing.
Are you doing a I'm just or something? Okay, cool. All right, we're separating.
We're
Okay.
gonna give Karen the words and she's gonna guess them.
Okay, so we are the last group. We have put together a comprehensive model, or spectrum that ties everything together, including a new way to remember modernism and postmodernism. In order to resolve problems of mutual concern, Evanoff introduces a new procedure by which ethical norms are created, and we know this as intercultural dialogue. So first, we're going to discuss Evanoff's views of ethical norms and the balance between individual and collective goals, including nihilism, oppressive, or nihilistic, oppressive, and liberatory views. We've also come up with real-life examples to help you apply the knowledge of these three views. And then we'll discuss Habermas, discourse ethics, and how it relates to intercultural dialogue, and how that process leads to moral transformation. So the first one we're going to go through is nihilism. And this is defined by Evanoff as social structures that should be annihilated to preserve individual freedom. Everything is subjective and relative to culture in this world. Individuals are free to move independently, and they share a motto of every man for himself. They have an ethics of respect, so they respect different cultures, they don't need to agree with anyone, and they don't want to repress individual creativity. It's a very monological way of thought. So moving down to the other end of the spectrum, we have the oppressive way of arriving at ethical norms. So kind of redefining terms that we've already been learning and processing together. Oppressive is the modern universalism, objective way of arriving at ethical norms. So it's the claim that individual freedom should be sacrificed to maintain social structures. So definitely minimizing the role of individual values to go for the collective goals there. The system defines the goals and applies them equally to all. So obviously a postmodernist would view this as repressive. And so we have the middle ground, which Evanoff would certainly advocate for is liberatory, otherwise known as constructivist, collective. It is a process of arriving at the most beneficial ethical norms for both the society and the individuals involved. So Evanoff believes that individuals experience self-realization in the context of societies which are governed by principles chosen by the people. So participatory power of the people will create that balance through intercultural dialogue. So as you can see, we're really giving different names to the same things, same concepts that we've been defining. So we have some great examples of that.
Thanks. So examples of nihilism is we were thinking about post-Typhoon Philippines, post-Katrina New Orleans, like the Watts riot. It was interesting, we were thinking about how together we were thinking about when is it right and wrong to be in the more, because we typically view this always negative, right? But sometimes the environment changes and you have to go to this. So we're not saying that you have to steal and all that good stuff, but if there's a huge typhoon that wipes away, there's no more police station, there's no more fire station, there's no more structure that you can receive help. How do you get what you need? So in those environmental situations, people can tend to go to a more nihilistic, every man for himself, do what you have to do to survive, I'll do what I have to do to survive. So then the second one, second line, the gold rush, 49ers, states' rights, World Wide Web, since we just talked with Alex Jones, was really about this guy that started the World Wide Web saying every man should be able to access information and knowledge. There should not be these oppressive, restrictive institutions. So these are more, especially the World Wide Web, more relative we get on the web every day to what we do every day as far as nihilism. The foundation of it has some nihilistic tendencies. So that's nihilism.
And then for examples of oppressive, in light of Nelson Mandela's passing, presenting apartheid, I'm sure you've heard many stories about how absolutely oppressive living under apartheid was. I've heard one NPR story, and there is a young man, actually white, in South Africa, who created a song about We Haven't Seen Him. It was about Nelson Mandela. They were not even, he, as a white person, was not allowed to have a photo of Nelson Mandela. If he had been found with such a thing, he would have been in prison for 4 years. Talk about oppressive. And that's for the people who were supposedly not the targets of oppression, but the society was so controlling and the rules were so restrictive that something as simple as someone's picture was not permitted. China had developed their one-child rule because they saw that the population was going to get out of control. They had to do something to put the brakes on the rural population, and that started in '79. They are now beginning to see the repercussions of making that decision, where they have elderly people without, if their only child has passed away, they are uprooted. And so they're starting to revisit some of that and make some exceptions to their hard and fast rules. But as a society, they are still controlling very directly with forced abortions even, how many children people are allowed to have. And of course, Hitler's Germany, that speaks for itself, what that's all about. And for the Star Trek fans, I should put this on too. Remember the Borg?
Ah,
That's what I was just.
resistance is futile. I love the board. No, I don't. I love the idea of the collective, you know? I mean, wow. Hey, I got 2 pop culture things I want to add to that. If you are looking for a great read, especially a book on tape, about South Africa, a book called The Power of One.
There's a movie too.
Yeah, the movie is not very good. It is great, The Power of One. It is a great read. And if you listen to it on tape, the guy has really good, authentic dialects. But it's about what Africa was like just before apartheid really became institutionalized. And then a movie, The Book Thief. It's about Hitler's journey. I read the book, but the movie is absolutely beautiful. It just came out. It is beautiful. I highly recommend. It's just beautiful. Those are great. Great examples.
Say that.
The Power of One.
The Power of One.
The movie's not terrible, I read it.
Yeah. Yeah, it just wasn't the same, you know? Yeah.
So, real briefly, examples of liberatory, natural mix, that's what's going on right now. Very participatory, very constructive. I put United Nations up there because I think it's in theory is great, but after listening to Muhammad, it's like a couple of strong nations on one who control the United Nations, so maybe not the best example, but in theory, this united, constructive, collective approach is the liberatory approach.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to just have us reflect for a second on our Spider-Man experience, where there was a collective goal, and we approached it from a variety of methods. Everything from having an appointed leader who did change, so it wasn't a dictator. And that appointed leader was, they were very good at soliciting ideas, thoughts. We learned from our collective experience. It's best if so-and-so goes through this thing because they're pretty much guaranteed getting through it. So we all agreed to make that so. So our follow-up question: what is the purpose of intercultural dialogue on ethics, according to Adam? Purpose of intercultural dialogue on ethics.
So you don't get stuck in a rut, a presumptive rut.
Mm.
To learn about ourselves, and it's through dialogue, it broadens our vision. We can reflect back on ourselves. And I think in the end, what I took out of it is the pursuit of a good life.
Mm.
And what that means to us
Mhm.
in the context of what we live in.
Mhm.
Directly from the reading, it says, by engaging in intercultural dialogue, we are thus able to extend the range of our own potential experience.
And he also talked about alternatives always being available. You know, which some people you get to this dead end point, or you're blocked, or you're boxed in, and you just don't think there's any alternative, so you have to do this, even though it is not right in terms of the balance of the different societies or different ethical viewpoints.
Yes.
So knowing that there's always an alternative.
Yes, exactly.
And being open-minded by accepting other people's thoughts and opinions.
Well, I think you have to have, and it talks about this in the reading as well, there has to be that mutual respect for others, but you can still have your own. But when you see, and I think probably some of us are learning that in our multicultural and ethnical experience things as well, is that we have some common goals and things that we can work towards and find solutions that are beneficial to everybody. But if you don't have that dialogue, you don't know these things about other groups that share the same beliefs and values and concerns.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that out, because we have a tendency to think we know best, because this is the way it's always been done here, and it can close us off to the possibilities of doing something in a different way that actually could be better, it could make more sense, it could be more beneficial, if we but take a few moments and explore that option.
I've also found through intercultural dialogue that, I mean, we might think that one culture is different from something, but at the end of it, sometimes we're not that different from each other. There's a lot of principles or virtues that we hold that are the same, and there might be different techniques or approaches to how to get there, but we are different, but we're not that different.
Right. That's, and that's why Aristotelian kind of virtue ethics are universal, that there is universal good in man, no matter where. And we all innately are kind of born with good, and those are the virtues that human nature imbues us with those virtues, and then we have to act on them. We have a moral obligation to act on them.
When Kathleen was talking about the web experience and some of the stuff that we're doing, like physically, and I won't forget our first thing we did, getting that ball passed around the room, until we got out of our spot and was just watching it, actually went over and said, well, grab this and use that. That is when things started to work. So I think that's a great, physical example of just, you gotta have that intercultural, or just mixing, everybody bringing in their ideas to get things done.
One of the words he uses is that everything is contingent, which is, you said kind of in a context or relative to something else. So that whole spider web, contingencies are kind of if-then scenarios. So to know that there are always going to be if-then, and our course of action might be different depending on the contingencies, which, I thought about that in the spider web. Well, if we do this, then that means that, which is another good word for context or relative contingent. Erin, do you have something? All right. Another really unique approach. Thank you for that. That could have been dry. You made it juicy.
We will seek to do the same thing on number 8. So number 8 is explain the references to Habermas's discourse ethics and how that process results in moral transformation. You all have done a very good job of defining intercultural dialogue, and Habermas shares your perspective in what he calls the discourse
advocates for a similar social dialogical process. He believes that conclusions are reached on the basis of considered debate, not just debate, but considered debate. And so both individuals, parties, opinions would be in discourse, in dialogue about each side's ethical standpoint, but the purpose of this debate is not to harmonize existing views. We won't walk away with the same viewpoint that we came with, but rather we would go through a process that he calls moral transformation. So Colleen will tell us about that.
Yep, and moral transformation is really where dialogue helps shape an individual and create new understanding. So while Elizabeth's point earlier, I was gonna talk about that a little bit, but thought I'd wait for the presentation. About staying true to yourself is so important, but it's also really important to be critical of your own ideas and ethics and thoughts, because they can be influenced, and you can create, and you can adapt and be flexible to taking on new viewpoints and kind of having a broader vision, as Judith was saying earlier. So everyone's views, interests, existing conceptions are tested through this debate and discourse ethics.
So some examples of that, and I want to jump back a little bit and talk about, I was talking about environment. So you've got the nihilistic, everybody does their own thing. You've got the liberatory, where it's more constructive, everybody kind of comes together, and you have the progressive, or someone, or some group determines everything. And so I always want to be critical of what I'm reading and not just accept it just because the author wrote it. But I was thinking about the example of, like, there's a fire in the house, right? So we don't have time to be constructive and everybody decide which way we're going because there's a fire. We don't really want, especially if it's your family, you don't want everybody going their own way because what if two people are wrong, or, you know. So you don't have time to be nihilistic. You have to be somewhat oppressive. Hey, I know where the door is, we're all going this way. So just kind of breaking up the foundations and saying these different theories are not always negative. Sometimes you might need them in a certain situation. But to go from this constructive, everybody comes together process into moral transformation. I think it encompasses everything. I think he talks about how you have to have a somewhat structured environment, but there has to be some period of freedom. And that's what creativity is, what we don't want to limit in the fact. You know, he said it's a fact that we're going to create these norms. Now, how far do these norms go is what he says. How do we arrive at them, and how far do they go is what we always have to be considerate of. So we're always going to create structure. There's always going to be some conformity, but there needs to be some creativity as well. And so Gardner's creative mind talks a little bit about that when he says that it's not actually considered creative until it's been tested by those who are within that field of industry. And they say, yeah, that is innovative. Yeah, I do this all the time, and that's a little different, and it works. So, as Kathleen was saying, all must be tested, and all must be through considered debate before you can get to that creative place that takes you to moral transformation, which I still have a hard time saying that you're going to transform your morals, which are so embedded and so, but they're going to be transformed. But it has to be through this really difficult process of, you know, everything is debated, everything is tested. Yourself, what people are telling you, and then you come out different and new and creative, you know.
And a really, really excellent example of that process is, we're going to consider prohibition in two contexts. First, the original prohibition era that we experienced as a country, where there was discourse ethics going on for literally decades in advance of the final decision being made by the legislatures, and then voted on by the states, to institute prohibition against alcohol. It was very controversial for a long time. They worked through it, and they, as a collective country, we changed the morality of alcohol, of drinking alcohol. Then, once that was instituted, the reality of that, it was an example of the law of unintended consequences. And in blind spots, time and again, we saw where there were ethical situations. Okay, we're going to address that by imposing these sanctions, rules, whatever. And what continually happened? The very thing that they were seeking to control and monitor got worse. That's what happened with prohibition in our country, which ultimately resulted in the rescinding of that law. So they did the discourse, they had a moral transformation as a society, decided, okay, we're going to do prohibition, lived with it, saw, again, discourse happened. Hey, this isn't the way we thought it was going to go, it's not working. So that was quite a process. And then they transformed again and rescinded that restriction. So that was then. What's happening now? Basically, the same kind of process is happening right now in the context of legalization of marijuana.
I thought you were going to say wine and grocery stores.
I know.
Not too hard to debate.
In most states, wine in grocery stores is a done deal.
I know. I was just being a smart aleck.
But legalization of marijuana, I mean, if you had told me 40 years ago, because I'm old enough to have been here 40 years ago, that marijuana was even going to be considered being legal, I would have told you you're crazy. That just wasn't on the horizon for most people. But look at what's happening. You've got states going against federal regulations and laws and deciding that for their state, marijuana should be legalized. So, don't know if it'll ultimately be another one of those law of unintended consequences and they'll switch back, but we're in that process right now of the dialogue happening, the moral transformation piece coming together, and a societal decision being made as a result of that dialogue. And people have opened their minds to the possibility, minds that used to be slammed shut. So.
And I think that's a great lead into the question.
Yeah, so the question, and this was really a hard question for us, but we've already talked about it so much today, so I think it'll be easy to get dialogue from you. How are these processes related to the theories of utilitarianism, that's a mouthful, and universalism? So the processes they lead into moral transformation are they related to the theories of utilitarianism and universalism?
And I would just say here at the end, Evanoff did a great job of saying, here's why modernism's wrong, and here's why postmodernism's wrong. But there's probably somebody out there who's written a rebuttal to say, hey, buddy, constructivism isn't all it's chalked up to be either. And in my mind, that line of thinking is kind of where I was going in this question. I could have just said, if you were going to rebut him, what would you say and why? If you're having a hard time coming up with an answer to this one, it's another way you might think of it.
So I'll give the definition of when we looked at utilitarianism, that which produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Universalism, traditional definition is norms apply to all people, is valid at all times in all places.
So can those two exist within the construct of constructivism?
It's hard for us to.
argue. Initially I say no, but I'm not completely, convinced on it, but,
Yeah, no, there's not a right or wrong, but I think
Yeah, and
you've reasoned that out
The
rightly.
fascinating part of this part of the reading, as it relates to blind spot, is the concept he goes into public versus private norms. And so, you can't have universalism if you're saying that even within myself, I can have my public and my private. So it truly is, there can't be a universalism, because even within myself, I'm gonna have two sets.
Yes. Anybody else?
Speaking to that, when we did the moral DNA thing, we did it to, personal contacts and work contacts. And you get exactly the same answers.
So a word really he didn't use and nobody else used was compromise. You know, he never comes out directly and says, in discussing constructivism or discourse ethics, that somebody's going to have to compromise along the way. But to me, that really isn't, constructivism can mean I build my own shared understanding based on what everybody else influences me to do. But in that space of, you said earlier, did he get buy-in from the ship to say, we're gonna go over here on the Scylla side, and we're gonna get 6 heads bit off instead of Charybdis sucks us down and maybe everybody goes down with the ship. And then, how did those 6 people feel, and then what was the fallout of the decision of that? And so while he's using that as a metaphor for a constructivist approach to making an ethical decision, what happens after that? What was the climate on the boat? What about the people who said, man, you just sacrificed my best friend, so I'm pissed? And what happened? So to me, that's where I think, yes, all of this sounds lovely. That we're gonna all decide together a course, just like we think this is a good idea at the time, but somebody ain't gonna be happy. And then, what does that mean?
Well, and even, in the little audio thing from last night, on Toby Graves, where you have empathy for others, and you wanna help other people, and you don't always see that, they call it cognitive blind spots in what they were doing. Because it seemed like a good idea to help somebody, and that they don't think about the larger implications of what's done, because you're in that moment. And probably the same thing on the boat, they're thinking about that moment, how do we get through this moment, and not necessarily about the fallout from later, or what if somebody, who got picked those 6 people, or
Yeah.
how did it work?
Yeah, good, thank you for bringing in that story. And I love the way they make it look like a graphic novel, They got some bad shreds on that in the blog. I don't know if you read the blog, but people are like, why NPR should stick to just being audio, don't try to draw a graphic novel. But anyway, that's kind of popular in young adult literature right now, that graphic novel, they look just like that.
What strikes me is that there's so much assumption that everyone wants to play nice. And, look at North Korea, they're never gonna come and have this discourse. So it's, I don't know if I'm just jaded from years. I don't know.
Again, I never imagined the Berlin Wall would come down, or that Russia would fall, that USSR would fall apart, and.
Because that wasn't done through cooperation and
No.
discourse, that was,
There's some discourse.
It was big discourse.
Some discourse.
some of these, people aren't just gonna voluntarily give up their territory.
And I
So
think,
for the better good.
he's talking about developing intercultural understanding. And so we're not talking about high stakes here. we're not talking about socio-political systems. We're talking about, can't we all get along, and can I understand where you're coming from? So the stakes are a lot lower, you know, and I don't want to transfer the whole idea of constructivism is the way to govern. And so we're kind of making that leap, and I don't know that we can, should, and that's not his point. That's not the reason Evanoff wrote that article. So I think people would say, yes, in the context of how I understand people from different cultures, conversation and shared understanding gets us there. Does it get us where we need to be at the UN? I don't know. Yes, Mohammed.
I think, yeah, in light of this discussion, and we look at the example of Mandela, you know, when he came out of jail, he kind of reconciled people, right? He didn't say us against them. And furthermore, if you look at it, he was considered terrorist, even, you know, with the people he reconciled with, all their friends. But now that he died, even some of these people that used to look at him or call him that, you know, they're mourning for him. So I think that there's a wisdom in that constructism, or, you know, an approach that can be used universally. Maybe he used it locally there in South Africa, but now, you know, the world is looking at it as, you know, a model.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So the other class is about leadership. And so that's something that if you have a leader with vision, you may have to completely erase utilitarianism and universalism because he sees something that's going to be better down the road. And it's like, look, you know, it's not about the right now. And Mandela, I think, is a great example, and the whole world's littered with these examples. But people just saying this norm that we're experiencing together is not the best.
Yeah.
And I think inside all of us, we know what the best is.
Yeah.
But just like that child that grows up and just gets those things put on them, and then you just accept them and you're part of it. That happens to all of us. But deep down, we're like, yeah. My uncle shouldn't have said that. That was, you know, if we were in a different place, that wouldn't be cool. You know, that kind of stuff happens all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So
I think Nashville Next is a good example of that. You know, it's forward thinking, and the whole idea of the AMP and people. You know, if you went to any of those Nashville Next speakers, and I didn't go to all of them, but I tried to follow on the blog, the research about traffic patterns and congestion and the heavy population, that will we look back and say, wow, you know, what a mistake we made by not acting on these things, which I think has just been super smart in Nashville Next. If you went and heard any of those speakers about urban planning, you came away saying, wow, I have to get out of my comfort zone and be willing to give something else for the greater good of what we can all hope and want to live in down the road. Are y'all participating in that, anybody? That's terrific.
you know,
Terrific.
internet.
Whew. All right. I think we did that to death, but you guys did, I mean, really. Thank you for hanging in there and getting through it. I hope you feel like you gained 2 IQ points. That's just more than 2. Okay. All right, so we're going to do lunch now.